I thought I was just stopping a beating until the girl I saved looked up at me and whispered she was a chief's daughter. Now the whole town wants us gone, and I'm tangled in a war I once helped light. This is how saving her became the one thing that might finally make me right with the past. A shocking revelation comes next. But before we uncover the truth that shook the entire frontier, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't want to miss more stories like this. The dust off the firebrush trail stuck to my skin like the kind of shame you don't earn but carry anyway, and the sun overhead didn't care how long I'd been trying to outrun my past. My name's Colt Brannigan. I'm 37 years old, and I've spent most of those years riding from one busted town to another, trying to find a place that didn't spit me back out. Dry Hollow wasn't on any map I trusted, but it rose from the heat shimmer like a mirage, with a bad temper, crooked signs, sagging roofs, and a silence that pressed against your ribs like it was daring you to breathe wrong. I rode in slow, my horse's hooves the only sound on Main Street, and hitched her outside a store that smelled like rust and wilted onions. That's when I heard it, a voice sharp as barbed wire, snarling words no decent man would use, followed by the thud of something soft hitting something hard. I followed the sound without thinking, boots crunching gravel until I reached the alley behind the saloon, where 3 men had cornered a girl no older than 15. She was curled into herself, arms wrapped tight around her ribs, dirt streaked across her cheeks like war paint, and blood on her lip that hadn't dried yet. One of the men raised his hand again, laughing like her pain was a game, and I drew my Colt .45 and fired once into the sky. The shot cracked through that heavy silence like thunder, and they scattered, cursing under their breath, none of them brave enough to look me in the eye. The girl didn't flinch, didn't move, just looked up at me with eyes too tired for her age, like she'd already seen the end of things and come back quiet. I knelt beside her, offered my canteen, and waited while she studied me like a man studies a cliff edge before jumping. She didn't drink, just nodded once like she'd decided I wasn't worse than what she'd known. I picked her up slow, careful not to press the bruises I could see, or the ones I couldn't. A shopkeeper leaned out of his doorway and said I ought to let the sheriff handle that kind of girl. I looked at him and said the sheriff could go to hell. Then I walked on, past the stairs, past the whispers, carrying a stranger who already felt like more than that. I didn't know her name, not yet, but I knew what I saw. Someone broken, yes, but not gone. And I knew this too. Whatever trouble I just invited by stepping in, it was mine now. And I wasn't backing down. She didn't cry out when the first boot hit her ribs, or when the second man grabbed her hair and slammed her down into the dirt like she wasn't even human, just something in the way of their anger. I'd seen cruelty before, worn it like a second skin in towns that dressed it up as justice, but there was something about this that made my blood rise slow and hot, like a storm building beneath my ribs. The girl lay curled in the square's red dust, maybe 14 or 15, bones too small for the weight of the fists raining down, her dress torn and stained with earth, her breath shallow like she was trying to disappear with each exhale. One man shouted that she'd tried to steal jerky, another swore she'd spit on his boots, but their voices were nothing but noise to me, the kind that masked cowardice with volume. I didn't ask questions. I just moved. One step into the circle of bodies and time slowed like it always does when the line between what's right and what's easy starts to blur. My fist connected with the loudest mouth first, splitting his lip and knocking 2 teeth loose, the sound a dull crunch that felt righteous. Another came at me with a belt wrapped around his hand, and I ducked, drove my shoulder into his gut, and watched him fall like a sack of wet grain. By the time the third one ran, yelling for the sheriff, the rest had already scattered like roaches caught in daylight. The girl didn't move, not even to flinch, and that stillness was worse than any scream. I dropped to my knees beside her, palms open, voice low like I was talking to a wild thing that'd been hunted too long. "You're safe now," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Her eyes flicked to mine, dark and full of something too old for her age, something that said she'd heard those words before, and they hadn't meant a damn thing. I pulled my bandana from my pocket, wiped the blood from her cheek, and felt her tremble beneath the weight of that kindness, like it hurt more than the bruises. Folks started to gather again, watching from porches and doorways, whispering like their silence hadn't just fed the violence. I stood, cradling her in my arms, and turned to face them. "This girl is under my protection," I said, loud enough to cut through their shame. No one answered. No one moved. Just the wind kicking up more dust around my boots, and the weight of 100 eyes that didn't have the decency to meet mine. I carried her out of that square and didn't look back, because I knew if I did, I'd see nothing but the truth about Dry Hollow, that this wasn't the first time it happened. It was just the first time someone had said no. I carried her through town like a man carrying something both breakable and burning, arms stiff with the weight of her silence, heart pounding with the wrongness of what I'd just seen. She was light, too light, like someone had been trying to erase her one skipped meal at a time, and every step toward the doctor's office felt like dragging the truth behind me for everyone to see. Doc Wheeler didn't ask questions, just nodded and cleared his table, the way a man does when he knows the world doesn't always come with explanations. I laid her down and stepped back, watching as the old man peeled away layers of dirt and cloth and found bruises blooming like ink stains beneath her skin. Her arms told stories her mouth hadn't yet found words for, stories written in purple and yellow and lines that hinted at something far older than this day's violence. I stood in the corner, fists still clenched, and realized my knuckles were bleeding from where bone had met bone. She watched me from the table, not scared, not even curious, just watching like she'd already figured out what kind of man I was, and was weighing whether that mattered. She didn't speak when the doc asked her name, didn't flinch when he cleaned the cuts or stitched a shallow slice above her eyebrow, but her eyes flicked to mine every time the pain got close, like she wanted to see if I would look away. I didn't. I held her gaze and let it tell me everything I needed to know. She was smart. She was proud. And she had survived something far bigger than a town square beating. The doc sighed after finishing up, wiped his hands, and asked me in a voice softer than usual if I had any idea what I was getting into. I said no. I said I didn't care. I said that a girl left to bleed in the dust while the whole town watched and did nothing was enough for me to stay involved. He looked at me a long while before nodding and handing me a bottle of liniment and a tin of salve. "She doesn't speak much English," he muttered, "but she sees everything. I already knew that. I'd seen it in the way she tracked every movement, every sound, every breath, like it might turn into danger if she blinked. When I helped her sit up, and she reached for the tin with shaking hands, she didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. That look she gave me, it wasn't trust, not yet. But it wasn't fear either. It was something else. A thread, a beginning, the kind that wraps around your spine before your mind even catches up. And right then, standing in a room that smelled of iodine and dust and something ancient beneath it all, I knew I wasn't walking away. Not now, not ever. After the doc let her rest, I took a seat by the window, eyes drifting to the satchel that had fallen from her shoulder during the scuffle. It was small, worn thin at the seams, but something about the way she'd clutched it, even while unconscious, told me it mattered more than it looked. I picked it up gently, like lifting a bird's nest from a ledge, and opened it to find a bundle of beads woven into soft leather cord. They weren't arranged randomly. No, this had purpose, pattern. I stared at the design until the years peeled back like bark, and I was young again, hunched beside a tribal fire, deep in the Wyoming stretch, learning to read trail signs and quiet messages that spoke louder than any white man's ink ever could. My breath caught somewhere behind my ribs when I realized what I was looking at. The symbol was unmistakable. Fox River Tribe. Not just any band either, but the inner family crest I'd seen once, maybe twice in my scout days, stitched into the sash of the old chief's daughter when she came to trade with the cavalry outpost. That emblem didn't just belong to a tribe. It belonged to blood, lineage. It was sacred, the kind of mark that carried weight generations deep. I looked over at her, sleeping now beneath the doc's blanket, her dark hair fanned across the pillow, face bruised but still burning with something fierce underneath. My gut twisted hard. If she was who I thought she might be, then this wasn't just a matter of a girl being wronged in a town full of cowards. This was something bigger, something that could catch fire if the wrong people caught wind of it. I sat back, letting the pouch rest in my hand, feeling the heaviness of it settle into my palm like a stone from the bottom of a river. The room felt colder somehow, not from the weather, but from the knowledge seeping into my bones. This girl wasn't lost. She was hidden, or had been, until today. And I just dragged her into the open with every good intention a man could carry. My fingers traced the beads one last time before tucking them back into the pouch and slipping it beneath her pillow. When her eyes fluttered open a few minutes later, and she saw me watching, she didn't flinch. Didn't reach for the bag either, just stared, as if waiting to see what I'd do now that I knew. I gave her a small nod, slow and certain, then rose to stoke the fire. No words passed between us, but something shifted. The truth had its own gravity. And now that I'd touched it, there was no pretending I hadn't. Whatever path this girl was on, I'd just stepped onto it beside her, and whether that meant peace or war, I figured I'd find out soon enough. They came in just before sundown, 3 of them, riding hard with dust in their teeth and hate in their eyes, the kind of men who smell like blood even when they ain't bleeding, who don't knock before they ruin something. I watched them from behind the saloon's curtains, the girl tucked upstairs with the window locked and the floorboards creaking if she so much as breathed too hard. They tied their horses like they planned to stay, and asked around like they already knew the answers, spitting tobacco juice on the porch as they flashed iron and showed a leather scrap with a hand-drawn sketch that could have been any girl if you squinted, but wasn't just any girl to them. I heard them say she was stolen property, like she was a damn saddle or mule, and my jaw clenched so hard I felt something crack behind my molars. When they asked me, I told them I'd seen someone like her get on a freight wagon heading west, even threw in some tears for flavor, said she looked scared and small and probably wouldn't last the ride. They looked at me a long time, like dogs sniffing smoke, and one of them touched the butt of his revolver like a reflex more than a threat. I didn't blink, I just waited. They rode out of town by dusk, slow, like they were buying time to think, and I told myself maybe that was the end of it, but I knew better. That night, while the girl lay curled in the cot with the blanket pulled over her head like it could block out memory, I heard the first crack of a rifle against the cabin wall, then 2 more. Then a bottle filled with burning oil that missed the roof by inches. I grabbed the girl, and we hit the dirt out back, rolling behind the woodpile, her breath coming fast against my chest as I held her still and counted the footsteps. They didn't want her dead, just scared. They wanted her back like some lost animal they had branded, but she wasn't theirs anymore, and I had made her a promise with my fists and my silence. When the gunshots stopped and the stars came back out, I knew this wasn't about a girl who ran. It was about men who never thought they'd be told no. And now, I was in their way. We sat outside the cabin that night, the 2 of us wrapped in silence so thick it could have been stitched into the sky. Only the wind, daring to speak, as it teased through the pines and rattled the chimes I never got around to taking down. The fire crackled low beside us, more ember than flame now, the smoke rising in soft threads that caught the moonlight like whispers caught mid-sentence. She'd been watching the flames the way some folks watch a coffin lower into dirt, like something final had already happened, and the world just hadn't caught up yet. Her hands were tucked in her lap, fingers laced so tight, her knuckles looked bloodless, and I didn't ask her anything. Not this time. I just waited, same as I had every night since she arrived, because the kind of truth she carried didn't come out with questions. It came when it was ready, when it was safe, and no sooner. And then, like something inside her gave way all at once, she spoke. Her voice was soft and cracked, like it had been sitting too long on a shelf, unused. "Tala," she said, just that one word at first, and I heard the fire shift like it was listening too. "My name is Tala. I didn't move, didn't blink, just let her keep going. I'm 13. My father is Dakota." She looked up at me then, and the weight behind her eyes made me forget how to breathe for a second. "Chief of the Fox River people." I swallowed hard. The name hit me like a thrown stone, not because I didn't know it, but because I did. Dakota wasn't just a chief. He was the one who'd tried to keep peace long after others stopped trying. The one they blamed for not picking a side when the rail tracks split the land like a wound. "I wasn't running away," she said. "I was trying to get to someone, to warn them. There's a man. He made a deal with soldiers. They were going to blame it on us, on our people." Her breath hitched. I heard him say it. I tried to tell the one they were going to betray. But someone caught me before I got far. Her voice broke on that last part, and she looked away, back at the dying fire like it could forgive what the world hadn't. I reached over, slow and careful, and laid my hand on hers. She didn't pull away. The silence that followed didn't feel empty this time. It felt like the start of something, a name, a truth, a reason to stay. I was hammering a loose plank back into the porch when I heard the shuffle of boots behind me, not hurried, not hesitant, just the kind of step that says the man wearing them doesn't need to knock to be let in. I turned and saw old Ben Marlowe, leather-faced and quiet as desert stone, the kind of man whose silence said more than most folks' sermons. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just lit his pipe with a match scratched off his belt buckle and looked at me the way a man looks at a dog that's wandered back after being whipped. "You should let her go," he said through a curl of smoke. "Ain't your burden to carry." I leaned on the hammer, chest tight, hands dirty from more than just wood. "She's a child, Ben." He took a long drag, stared at the pine line, and let out a sound that was half sigh, half something deeper. "So were they," he said, and I knew exactly what he meant. I didn't answer right away. My throat was dry and my bones felt older than my years. He didn't need to explain it. He was there too, that winter day 10 years back when we rode into Fox River territory on orders signed in ink that turned out to be lies. They told us it was a raider camp, said we'd find stolen goods and war paint ready to spill blood. What we found were families. Women hanging laundry, kids chasing dogs, a school tent with a chalkboard still dusted with numbers. We didn't question it, not loud enough. By the time the smoke cleared and the horses stopped screaming, there was nothing left worth saving. I remembered a girl not much younger than Tala, lying face down beside a smashed bowl of cornmeal. I'd stepped over her like I was somewhere else. For years, I told myself I didn't know better, that I was just following command. But that lie never sat right, not in my gut, not in my sleep. Now here was another child from the same bloodline, broken and hunted, and I had a chance to do something that wasn't rooted in fear or silence. "Maybe I owe her," I said finally. Ben's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to something soft and sharp. "You don't owe her," he said. "You owe the ones who never got a chance to speak." Then he turned and walked off, pipe clenched in his teeth, the scent of tobacco trailing behind like the last word in a conversation no one wanted to have. I stood there for a while, the hammer still in my hand and the wind rising just enough to shake the trees. When I went back inside, Tala looked up, and I saw in her the weight of a tribe, the echo of a massacre, and maybe, just maybe, a way to make peace with the man I used to be. We left Dry Hollow before the sun had cleared the ridge. The kind of early start that lets you ride with the quiet for a while, before the world remembers to make noise again. Tala rode beside me, a little stiff at first, her hands gripping the saddle horn like it might buck her into the dust any second. I let her be. The horse was gentle, a gelding named Copper, more patient than most men I've known, and smart enough to match her rhythm. For the first hour, we didn't say much. The valley opened up like a wound beneath us, all mist and memory, and the air smelled of pine and something older, like stone that remembers being fire. Eventually, she spoke, pointing to the string of beads tied around her wrist. "This," she said, touching a yellow bead, "means light after storm." Her voice was small, careful. I nodded, not wanting to startle it back into silence. She went on, one bead at a time, telling me their names like they were people. Red for courage, black for grief, blue for sky, never seen again. It wasn't just a bracelet. It was a story she wore, one that didn't need pages to be real. I told her about the first time I rode a horse, how I'd clung to the mane like it could save my soul, how the saddle creaked under me like it was laughing. She smiled a little, just at the edge of her mouth. I showed her how to balance, how to shift her weight when the ground dipped, how not to pull too hard on the reins. "The horse listens better if you don't shout with your hands," I said. She tried, awkward at first, but by noon she was riding steady, her shoulders loosening, her spine less afraid. We stopped near a creek for water, and she traced a circle in the dirt with a stick. "Home," she whispered. I didn't ask if she meant where we were headed or what she'd lost. Some words mean both. We moved on, cutting through tall grass and willow thickets, the trail winding like a memory that doesn't want to be found. That night we made camp under a shelf of rock, stars hanging above like someone had punched holes in the sky just to let the warmth in. She handed me the bead string before we slept. "You keep it," she said, "so you don't forget." I took it gently, like it might crack if held too hard, and tied it around my wrist without saying a word. I'd ridden a lot of roads, chased a lot of ghosts, but that string felt heavier than any gun I'd ever drawn. Not because of the weight, but because of what it meant to be trusted by someone with every reason not to. She slept beside the fire, breathing steady. And for the first time in years, I didn't dream of the dead. The wind shifted strange as we rode into Coyote Pass, like the earth was holding its breath and waiting for something to break. Birds that had been chirping fell quiet, and Copper's ears twitched back just once before I saw the flash of metal on the ridge. The first shot tore into the dirt near Tala's horse, kicking up a chunk of gravel that sang past her head like a warning not quite kept. I didn't think. I grabbed her reins, yanked both horses behind a shale outcrop, and shouted for her to stay low. She didn't scream, didn't cry, just clenched her jaw and dropped behind the saddle. The second shot pinged off the stone, too close to call a miss. I peeked around the edge, counted 3 riders up high, tucked into the rocks like lizards with rifles, not bandits. Too well positioned, too focused. These men had been sent. I pulled the long gun from my scabbard and aimed for the one on the left, his hat just barely poking above the edge. I squeezed, and he dropped with a yelp that ended too fast. The second fired again, this time grazing my shoulder, but I didn't feel it. My blood was up. I fired back and saw him tumble backward, legs flailing like a kicked stool. The third tried to run, but I clipped his horse's leg, and both went down in a tumble of dust and cursing. When it went still, the silence returned like a sigh let out too slow. Then Tala whimpered. I turned and saw the red bloom on her upper arm, not deep, but enough to turn my throat to gravel. I ripped my bandana free, pressed it against the wound, and she didn't even flinch. "It's not bad," I lied. "Hurts," she whispered. "But I'm okay." Her voice was steady, more than I could say for my hands. After bandaging her up, I walked to the bodies. They weren't locals. One had a silver badge in his coat pocket, not a lawman's badge, but a brand. Dry Hollow's mayor used them for hired guns, the kind that did work without asking why. One of the rifles had a note tied around it. Just 3 words scrawled in charcoal. Stop her message. That confirmed what I already feared. Tala hadn't just run from a beating. She'd run from a plan, something bigger, something that someone powerful didn't want reaching her father. I buried the bodies shallow and kicked dust over the bloodstains. Tala watched, quiet and pale, but her eyes had gone hard again, like they were forging steel behind her gaze. "They'll keep coming," she said. I nodded. "Let them." That night, we camped without a fire. I sat with my back to a rock and my rifle across my knees while Tala slept beside the horses. I didn't blink much, didn't need to. I knew now this wasn't just about helping a girl. It was about standing between a lie and the truth someone wanted buried deep. The land changed before the trail did, like we crossed an invisible line that even the trees knew not to grow past. The air smelled heavier, richer with pine and damp moss, and something else beneath it all, something watchful. Tala sat straighter in the saddle, shoulders stiff, hands clenched around the reins like she was holding her breath through her fingertips. I didn't blame her. We were near the edge of Fox River territory, and if they were half as alert as I remembered, they already knew we were coming. Sure enough, we didn't make it another 100 yards before the forest moved. Not wind, not wildlife warriors. 6, maybe 7, stepped from the trees like smoke taking shape. Spears and bows in hand, their eyes didn't blink, didn't waver. I raised my hands slow, keeping them where they could see, then dismounted and guided Tala down from her horse. I didn't reach for my rifle, didn't even glance at it. One wrong twitch, and this meeting would be over before it began. "Her name is Tala," I said loud and clear, my voice carrying like a stone skipping across still water. "She came to warn you." For a moment, nothing. Then Tala stepped forward, blood crusted on her sleeve, dirt streaking her face, but her chin held high. She didn't flinch when one of the warriors raised his spear a little higher. She just whispered one word, "Father." That single breath shifted the entire moment like a gust through a house of cards. The warriors exchanged glances, and slowly, they lowered their weapons. Then, from behind the trees, a man emerged. Not just any man. Broad-shouldered, wrapped in a wolfskin cloak, his hair streaked with gray, and his face carved by time and sorrow. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe just heavier with grief. Chief Dakota. His eyes locked on Tala, and in that instant, the fury in them faltered, cracked, and fell away. He moved toward her with slow, measured steps, like he didn't quite believe she was real. "Tala?" he asked, and it wasn't a command or a greeting. It was a wound spoken aloud. She nodded, and something in him broke. He reached for her with arms that had once taught war and peace, and she ran to him like a child who finally found her way home. I turned my back and gave them the moment, though my eyes burned from holding the tears inside. When I faced them again, Dakota was staring at me over her shoulder, not with gratitude, not yet, but with a storm of questions and suspicion. I didn't flinch. I just nodded once. "We need to talk," I said. His jaw tensed. "Yes," he replied, holding Tala close. "Yes, we do." And just like that, the forest swallowed us again, this time not as enemies or strangers, but as men with a reckoning between them and a girl who had risked everything to stop a war before it began. They took my rifle, my belt, and my dignity with the same efficiency as snapping a twig under boot. By the time the dust had settled behind us and we were inside the village's outer ring, I was pulled from the saddle and shoved into a crude wooden cage reinforced with thick branches and iron nails. It smelled of sweat, rust, and old rage. Dakota didn't say a word when he gave the order, just nodded once, and turned his back, holding Tala in his arms like she was both a blessing and a burden he didn't know how to carry. The warriors posted near the cage didn't speak either, though one of them eyed me with something that wasn't quite hate. I sat down on the packed earth and waited, not because I was calm, but because years ago I had helped burn this place to the ground under false orders, and if they were going to deal me justice now, part of me figured I had it coming. But that girl, Tala, she wasn't done speaking yet. I heard her voice rise inside the longhouse, sharp and clear, like a river finding its path through jagged stone. She wasn't using English now. She spoke in her language, fast and fierce, each word a stone in a wall she was building between me and the grave they thought I belonged in. I caught my name, once, twice, then the word for mare, which I'd heard enough in old camp talk to recognize. I pressed my ear to the wood, as if that would bring the pieces together. Minutes passed like hours, and then Dakota stormed out, his face a storm of fire and confusion. Behind him came Tala, chin high, her eyes wet but unbroken. She knelt beside the cage and said, "I told him what you did, what they planned to do. I told him about Dry Hollow." I stared at her, then at Dakota, who had stopped a few feet away. "And he believed you?" I asked, barely able to lift my voice past the shame thick in my throat. "He believes me because I am his blood," she said, her voice steady. "And because I told him about the night you fought for me, when no one else would." Dakota stepped forward then, opened the cage himself, slowly, like it weighed more than wood and metal. "You carry ghosts, Brannigan," he said, "but not all of them are yours." I stood, unsure if this was forgiveness or just the start of something harder. "I came to make right what I helped break," I told him. He nodded once. "Then you will ride with us," he said, "because the storm is already coming." And as the door swung open and I stepped out, I knew the only way out of my past was through it, and through whatever hell Dry Hollow had waiting. Dakota didn't kill me, but he didn't forgive me either, and in some ways, that cut deeper. His eyes stayed hard when he spoke, like a man who'd buried too many brothers to hand out trust like candy, and I didn't blame him one bit. He said sparing me wasn't mercy, it was patience, and I could feel the weight of it settle on my shoulders like a yoke. "Saving my daughter bought you breath," he said, voice like gravel in winter, "but not belief." I told him I didn't come to be believed. I came to stop what's coming, and I'd ride back into that festering town myself to put a name and a noose to what they planned. He watched me a long time, then spat in the dirt and said, "You'll not ride alone. If you speak for my daughter, she'll speak for you." I turned to Tala, who stood beside the fire with her arms crossed and her eyes sharper than a hawk's. She didn't blink, didn't question, just nodded once, like she'd already decided she was going whether anyone said yes or no. We left at dawn, no fanfare, just two figures on horseback, one with ghosts in his saddlebag and the other carrying the weight of a whole people's bloodline in her bones. The land between the village and Dry Hollow didn't feel the same anymore. Every ridge looked like a rifle barrel. Every breeze smelled like betrayal. Tala didn't speak much, but she watched everything, and when she finally did say something, it wasn't small. "You think they'll listen to you?" she asked. I told her they'd listen long enough for me to show them what truth looked like when it knocked the teeth out of a lie. She didn't smile, but I caught the twitch of something close to it at the corner of her mouth. That night we camped near an old stream dead, the coals low, and I handed her my last strip of jerky without asking if she was hungry. She took it without thanks. I didn't need one. We weren't friends, not yet, but there was a rhythm to our silence that felt like the start of understanding. Before sleep, she pulled out her pouch and started threading beads in a new pattern, hands steady, eyes distant. I asked what it meant. She said, "It's a bond, not yet strong, but growing." I laid back on my bedroll and watched the stars try to outshine our firelight. I knew the road ahead was carved with thorns, not just from the mayor and his guns, but from the past that still wore my face. But I also knew this girl. This fierce, stubborn spark of a girl wasn't just my shadow, she was my reminder that redemption doesn't come with one good act. It comes with every step after. And I planned to take every one of them with her beside me, whether I deserved it or not. We rode into Dry Hollow like ghosts who'd clawed their way back from something worse than death, not to haunt the town but to hold it accountable. And from the moment our boots hit the dust, I could feel the lies in the air trying to hold their shape. The mayor stood on the courthouse steps, like a rooster fat on power, dressed in clean black, with a watch chain glinting like it bought him time he didn't deserve. His eyes narrowed when he saw Tala beside me, alive, upright, and unafraid, and I swear the color drained from his face like rot pulled from under paint. Folks started to gather, pulled in by the scent of truth coming to boil. I stepped forward, not with a shout, but with a voice, like a blade sliding free of its sheath, and said the words loud enough to gut the silence. I told them about the land treaty, about how the mayor signed false claims, and planned to use a child's death to ignite war with the Fox River people so he could scoop up what he called unused territory for himself and his backers. Some laughed like it was too wild to be real, but Tala stepped forward and held up the papers, water-stained but legible, each page bearing the real tribal marks and false seals. Then she spoke, not in anger but in clarity, naming names and dates. And when she said the word betrayal, it rang through that square like a church bell breaking a funeral silence. The mayor's hand twitched toward his coat, and my eyes followed it before my body did. I pulled my revolver but didn't raise it, just kept it steady by my thigh, not aimed, but not hidden either. "Try it," I said, soft and even, "but understand, if you draw, you don't get a trial. You get a grave." He hesitated, like a man realizing too late the house of cards he built was made of wet paper, then lunged anyway, shouting something about savages and liars. My shot rang out before he cleared leather. The bullet caught his pistol hand, sending the weapon skidding across the wood, and he howled more from shame than pain. The sheriff stepped forward then, slow but sure, and picked up the gun while nodding at me. "Been waitin' on the right reason," he muttered. "Now I've got it." They arrested the mayor in front of the whole town, his cries drowned out by murmurs turning to voices, voices turning to questions, and questions turning to something like reckoning. Tala stood beside me, shoulders back, eyes steady, and for the first time I saw not a girl lost in a storm, but a voice strong enough to steer one. The lie that nearly got her killed didn't stand a chance in the daylight, and neither did the man who built it. Truth had its day, and this time the law finally listened. The next morning felt like a breath held too long finally let go, and the town wore silence like a man trying on shame for the first time. Dry Hollow wasn't used to stillness, not this kind. Not the kind that comes after something loud and ugly breaks open and spills its guts across the square for everyone to see. The mayor was gone, locked up and waiting to be taken by federal men who wouldn't bother asking if he had anything more to say. Folks were whispering again, but it wasn't fear or gossip anymore. It was something softer, something closer to understanding, like they'd finally seen the girl as more than trouble and me, as more than just a man with a gun. I stood on the porch of the general store, sipping coffee that didn't taste as bitter as usual when I saw them coming. A small party of riders in the dust, calm and steady, no weapons drawn, but no smiles either. Tala stepped down off the stairs and waited, eyes sharp but not scared, her hands loose at her sides like she'd done all her fighting and had nothing left to prove. Chief Dakota led them, tall in the saddle, his braids silver at the edges and his stare hard as riverstone. They stopped in front of us without a word at first, just letting the moment stretch long enough to weigh what had been done and what hadn't. Then Dakota dismounted, walked toward me, and held something wrapped in buckskin. He spoke in his own language first, words that moved like wind over tall grass, and Tala translated after, though I already understood. "This is not reward," she said, her voice steady. "It is recognition." He handed me the bundle, and when I unwrapped it, I found a bow inside, carved from dark ashwood and marked with symbols I remembered from my scout days. Only this time, I knew what they meant. Peace, protection, a path forward. It was the kind of gift that didn't say thank you. It said, "Now you carry this too." Dakota looked at me then, long and full of things unspoken. "You broke the cycle," he said, in English this time, and it struck deeper than any praise I'd ever gotten. I nodded, not sure how to carry all that weight and grace at once, and said only, "She did the hard part." Tala looked up at me, then back at her father, and something passed between them that felt like a bridge being built where a wall had stood. They turned to leave, and as the horses moved slow through the dust, she glanced back once and smiled, not wide, not long, but enough. That night, I hung the bow above my door, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the hardest thing a man can do is unlearn the war in his bones and make room for something better, something lasting. Something like peace. The ride back to the cabin was quieter than I expected, not in sound but in feeling, like the air had settled into something still and honest, the way a field does after harvest, empty but not barren. The sun trailed me like an old friend who didn't know how to say goodbye, and every hoofbeat on the packed earth sounded like a drum for something finished and something beginning all at once. When I reached the ridge, I paused for a moment just to take in the sight of it all, the slope of the valley below, the tired trees swaying in the breeze, the roof of my cabin peeking through the brush like it had been holding its breath, waiting for me. I didn't expect to feel anything when I stepped through the door, but there it was anyway, thick in my throat. A silence that didn't accuse, didn't judge, just watched me cross the threshold and ask myself what kind of man I was now. The place hadn't changed. Boots still by the door, coffee pot on the stove. The coat I never wore hanging from the peg like a ghost. But on the table, right in the center where my supper might have gone, lay something that hadn't been there when I left. A small piece of beadwork, the kind made not for show, but for meaning. Red and black and white threads woven tight into a pattern I didn't fully understand, but my heart did. Tala's hands had made it. I knew that as sure as I knew my name. I picked it up slow, careful like it might vanish if I moved too quick. It was light, but it held weight, the kind you carry in your chest. I didn't hang it on the wall, not at first. I sat with it for a while, letting it sit across my knees as the fire caught in the hearth and crackled like a whisper from the past. Later, when the sky turned lavender and the air cooled, I rose and mounted it just above the fireplace, center beam, where it would catch the light in the morning and the shadow in the evening. A reminder, not of war, not of guilt, but of what can grow in the space between. Sometimes a man spends his whole life digging holes, thinking that's the only way forward. And sometimes, if he's lucky, someone hands him a seed instead. That beadwork was her way of saying, I'd been handed one. It didn't fix the past, nothing could, but it gave me something to build around. I still wake up before dawn most days, still split wood, still drink my coffee black, but there's a quiet in this place now that feels earned, a fire that doesn't rage but warms. And when I look at that piece above the flames, I don't see what was lost. I see what's left. I see what might yet be made.